in the, it's okay. That's fine, that size. And I might have been able to tell the Jewish story through sacred writings. And we'll be looking next week, not just at examples of sacred writings and sacred scrolls, but the tools and the equipment and how to actually make these instruments for writing, right? That haven't changed in terms of how we do that in thousands of years. So I think that's going to be really fun and really cool. And so let's begin. So we're looking at inspired art, Jewish art. And I have to tell you, just like last week, when I mentioned that that to pick, to go through the vast treasure trove, of Jewish stories was a practically impossible task, but you have to do it in the time that we have. And I picked out a few samples, especially ones that really speak to me. So we're going to do the same thing with art today. And art is something that you can just literally spend forever going through and still never finish the job. So again, I've picked several examples that I personally like, and hopefully it will take us on a gallery tour through the centuries to really get an understanding of how artists have tried to convey what's Jewish, what's Judaism to them, what's Jewish expression to them. And I think one of the questions I want to kind of ask right now, and kind of keep it in the back of your mind, okay? Just keep it there, or if you want, write it out so it's in front of you. But keep this question whenever you're looking at any of the examples that I'm going to show you. And the question is, what's Jewish about it? What makes it Jewish? And perhaps as a subset to that question, asking the question, so what defines Jewish art? What actually defines it? And there's going to be a couple of examples where we may have to really challenge ourselves to ask that question. It may not be so apparent. And I'm going to pose different possibilities about what that definition of what Jewish art could mean. So without further ado, I'm now going to try to do something technical here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Yeah, bear with me, Dylan. And then I'm going to hopefully do this. And if you could just give me a thumbs up to tell me if you see a picture on your screen of ancient wall graffiti. Yeah, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Excellent, good. And here's a bonus. Can you see me, those of you possibly with a laptop or a PC, can you see me in the top right of your screen? Well, we're not going to know about that. Hopefully that came across okay. Ah, good. Thank you, Akiva. Okay, great. Let's begin. Let's begin. What we're looking at this example right now, believe it or not, is graffiti. We think of graffiti sometimes, it's also called urban art, right? But graffiti can be, and by the way, here in Israel, we have some amazing graffiti exhibits, and you can experience them both in Jerusalem, right? Those of you who know what I'm talking about, there's some places in Jerusalem where graffiti artists, urban artists have really done some amazing work, usually on the exterior of a building. Tel Aviv has that, and Sderot, interestingly enough, which is a border town, border city with bordering Gaza, has experienced many, many years of rocket attacks. They actually brought in an amazing group of people called Artists for Israel. And they consisted of graffiti artists, and they actually did beautiful art on bomb shelters. Anyways, this is an example of graffiti art, and it actually goes back, believe it or not, all the way to the 1st century. That's the 1st century of the Common Era. In other words, this is right around the time just before the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. And for those of you who may have actually seen this firsthand, and I welcome you next time you have a chance to visit Jerusalem, to go and take a look at an area called the Herodian Quarter. It's what's called the Upper City of Jerusalem, and you'll have a chance to actually see this firsthand. It's an amazing, amazing example of something which is there for the sake of just beauty, right? There's no ritual purpose for what you're looking at this moment. You're looking at art that somebody, possibly a Cohen, did on the plaster of the interior of his wall. And as you can see, he's got a couple things going on here. He actually has a menorah, okay, the menorah, the candelabra, that may have been the design that was in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. And he also has two boxes, as you can see, two boxes on the sides, and they seem to indicate the boxes where the matzot, where the actual, what they call in English, the showbreads, right, would have been placed. This is absolutely amazing, because on the one hand, he may have kind of doodled this. I don't want to use the word doodle. He created this this piece, perhaps to be a reflection of what he is doing in his day-to-day occupation, okay? Or perhaps somebody else in his family did that, because after all, they're perhaps Kohanim, they're priests in the temple, and it's not unusual for people to have art that reflects the sort of things that they do in their life. One thing is for sure, is that this has endured 2,000 years, this artwork on plaster, and I'm going to call it Jewish art, okay, because it definitely reflects a Jewish symbol, that being the menorah, and the showbread tables, which were part of Jewish ritual life, Jewish religious life, and as far as I'm concerned, this is a great example of Jewish art from that period. Move to the next photo. This is also coming from Israel. This is from a synagogue in Hamat Gader in the Golan Heights, in the Golan. And this is very interesting because this is jumping ahead a few hundred years. This is from the 5th century. And, you know, when I think about art, so I'm going to throw this out as an idea, and you can definitely argue with me, absolutely. But sometimes when we make something into art that is a functional, right? That is a functional thing. So when we decide, you know what, let's take this thing that's very functional, in this particular case, a separation block, which was supposed to separate between what's called the bima of the synagogue. That would have been the place where the Torah would have been read, and perhaps that's where the leader would be leading the prayers, and the rest of, right, and the rest of the synagogue area. So this would have been a block, if you will, on top of a column, or perhaps between columns, and that could have been the end of the story. But here an artist has come along and has decorated it with, again, a Jewish theme. Again, there's that menorah. We're going to see a lot of menorahs in this talk today. And he's got this menorah, and he's got other things going on, perhaps agriculture, leaves, trees, maybe roots. You can use your own imagination. There's no right or wrong answer here. Perhaps there's roots descending out of going downward from the menorah. I don't know. But one thing is for certain, this decoration, yeah, wasn't necessary in order to create that separation between the bima and the rest of the synagogue, okay? So perhaps the artist comes along and says, well, as long as we have this separation, let me make it beautiful, let me make it artistic and creative. And I think that begins, for me anyways, and again, I'd like to hear your ideas, but for me, it tells me that when I take an object, a Jewish object, a religious object, and then add something to make it beautiful, or maybe not even beautiful, just so I can express my feeling about it, so then I think we have something called Jewish art. So let's move away from sculpture and two-dimensional, or sort of two-dimensional work, and get into an actual well, you could call this more like a sculpture, but it's really a functioning sculpture, isn't it? It's actual functioning, working oil lamp. This is an oil lamp. It's actually made out of bronze. And as you can see, you can even imagine how it would work, right? You would have the wick coming out of the extreme end, and then the oil would fill up the center well. And then you can see, it doesn't exist anymore, but you can see where the cover, right? The cover would have been. You could see the bracket that would have held the cover. And so for all intents and purposes, that heart of the oil lamp is a perfectly functional lamp, no problem whatsoever. It's going to give you light. You're going to be able to work by it, right? As a result of this thing, you can extend your life into the darkness of the night. But here we see, jotting out the back, we see some amazing things. We see again, there's our menorah, and it's interesting that as I go through most of Jewish art throughout the centuries, it's the menorah that seems to be the common thread in terms of Jewish symbols. Not the Star of David that we associate today, but we will see examples later on of how the Star of David actually does show up as a prominent Jewish symbol. But here we've actually got menorahs coming through. And again, this is an amazing piece. Again, we're talking about something that goes back to either the 5th or 6th century. And this is obviously something that would not have been a cheap or easy thing to make. And yet here again, we're expressing art and creativity and beauty in something that is extremely functional. I mean, a lamp, which like this, is as functional as the desk lamp that you have on your desk, as the light that you have in your room. This is a very functional object, and yet beautifully decorated. And to add that level of beauty to something that's very functional. Is this Jewish art? Well, in this particular case, this lamp could have been anywhere in the world, belonging to anybody in the world, right? But because a Jewish artist comes along and says, well, I'm going to actually turn it into a Jewish lamp, okay? So I love Hanukkah, right? If you love Hanukkah, put up your hand. I think Hanukkah, right? Isn't that a great... Dylan, were you in spot for Hanukkah? Yeah. So, I mean, Hanukkah is just a great chag, whether you're celebrating it anywhere in the world, whether you're in Sfat, which I think is one of the best places to experience Hanukkah, or Jerusalem. Hanukkah is amazing. Hanukkah, however, is something that we have been celebrating all over the world throughout the centuries. And it's something where you can, right? You can, if you want to, fulfill, right, the obligation of Hanukkah by quite simply taking a bunch of little bowls, okay, filling them with oil or putting candles in them and lighting them, and voila, you'll be fulfilling the mitzvah of Hanukkah. But we're going to see time and time again that our artists, our Jewish artists, wouldn't let it go at that. They had to make it really something special. This is really, I love this Hanukkah, this menorah for Hanukkah. It's made of ceramic, and it's from North Africa, and it's from the 18th century. And the feeling is that it was most likely made by, since it is ceramic and it is from North Africa, that there were Jews living in North Africa who lived in caves. They actually lived in caves. They were primarily cave dwellers in the 18th century, and it's very likely that of all the materials that they would have had accessible to them, that ceramic clay would have been something very convenient. And again, that's important, I think, for our conversation about art, because art ultimately is going to be about using the materials that are readily available and that aren't astronomically expensive, and perhaps in fact the other way, perhaps in fact very cheap, and perhaps even free, where you could just gather things up. So I think it's very interesting that this side of art, as we look at it, also teaches me about Jews from North Africa who lived in caves. I kind of never really thought about that before, to tell you the truth, until I actually came across this example and went, wow, that's so cool. Jews lived in caves in North Africa in the 18th century. So since we're on the theme of Hanukkahs, so let's move to the 19th century. And this Hanukkah is from Germany. It's, again, when we're talking about the materials that Jews are using, they're going to use, or that artists are using, they're going to be using whatever materials are available to them. And in Germany, you can get silver and you can get gold, okay? Because it's a center for the exchange. There's a whole marketplace for the buying and selling of precious metals. And again, one of the things I want to do when I'm looking at Jewish art besides going, wow, that's really beautiful, besides doing that, is I want to dive into the story, right? That's what our whole theme is about finding out what story is the artist trying to tell us. So take a look really, really closely. And if you've got like a mobile device, like a iPhone or a Android, so you can do this even with anything, is you can actually, if you can't, you can try and enlarge the picture if you want to, or you can just get close to your screen and take a look at the very top at the center of this Hanukkah. Well, first of all, you have this Hanukkah, and then built into the Hanukkah, you've got this picture of a Hanukkah. Actually, it's not a Hanukkah. It's actually the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, right? The Hanukkah for Hanukkah actually has 8 oil or candle wells, and then there's a 9th, which is the shamash. But the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash was actually a 7-branched candelabra, if you will. And that's actually the picture in the center here. But look above that, if you will, and you will notice a 2-headed bird. Can you see that? It's a little hard to make out, but look really, really closely, and it looks very, very peculiar. There's a 2-headed bird, and you can see the wings kind of splayed out, and the legs of the bird are also kind of like splayed. Okay, and there's another kind of a tush tail coming out the back, and there's this bird on top. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting, because there's a lot of other animals going on here, right? There's a bear, and there's a couple of lions and all that kind of stuff. But I get the lions, I get the bear even. But what's that bird doing up there? What's a 2-headed bird? It's a little bit weird. I started checking into it more, and I should mention that in my work, as the head of an NGO, so I get to travel. Well, I had been traveling a lot, and I've spent a lot of time traveling in Europe, and especially in Germany, where this Hanukkah actually was made. And actually, the national bird of Germany is the German eagle. It's a German eagle, not different than the American bald eagle. This is how the German eagle has looked throughout the centuries. Interestingly, interestingly, the German eagle, has become more stylized throughout the years, especially in the last 100 years. But it is still, to this day, the national symbol of Germany. Interestingly, that during the Nazi period, that they also continued using the bird, except now the bird was on top of a swastika. But in Germany, they've so isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that on this menorah, Hanukkah, which is supposed to be a holiday which talks about the fight between Judaism and secularism, or Judaism and assimilation, right? That on top of this Hanukkah happens to be the national symbol of Germany. So since we're still talking about Germany, I wanted to give you another example. And again, this is a beautiful, beautiful piece. This is what's called a Torah Shield. It's actually a shield or a plate that would go over the front of the Torah. It has no functional purpose, to tell you the truth. There's no actual need for it, really. Okay, it's decorative, and therefore it makes it beautiful, because there are actually precious stones and other materials that went into this Torah shield, but it doesn't actually have a functional use. It's there for decoration. In Hebrew, it says Keter Torah, which means the crown, the crown of the Torah. Beautiful, beautiful piece. And as you can see further down, there's the 10 Commandments, right? Split 5 on one side, 5 on the other. And what do we have in the middle? Remember, this is made in Frankfurt, Germany in the year 1890. And what do we have sitting in the middle of this beautiful piece of art? We have, take a look at that. It is you guessed it, it is a German eagle. Same thing. He's not 2-headed this time. He's only got 1 head. Okay, but nevertheless, German eagle, exact same thing. The wings are spread out, the legs are spread out, the same idea. The German eagle is holding the 10 Commandments. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. Again, there's this whole idea of bringing this nationalism if you will, this German pride into Judaica, to Jewish art. And then I looked a little bit closer, and again, I don't know if you can see this on your devices, but if you can look really, really closely, and you'll see that the bird itself is wearing a shield. Okay, how many of you think that that's the American flag? Exactly. So I started thinking, what's the American flag? What's the story here? What's going on? And then I found out something interesting. This was made in Frankfurt, Germany in 1890 for a particular client. And that client was Congregation Emmanuel in New York City. And I thought that was very, very interesting. Is it possible? And I don't have the answer, but I'm going to throw it out there as a possibility. Is it possible that a German artisan made this beautiful Torah shield for their client in New York and then threw on the American shield on top of the German eagle? Again, I don't know, but I just love the way that this beautiful piece of art is somehow causing me, or hopefully also inspiring you, to maybe think about it a little deeper. So you'll hear more about this next week, but I am a Sofer Stam. I am a Torah scribe. And writing on parchment is my passion. But here we have something that that complements, right, the writing of whatever the sacred scrolls, and that's the illustrated manuscript. And I think that it's very, very special that there's a lot of freedom to be able to reflect from the artist's perspective how they feel about the text, right? And it's really kind of interesting, I think, because we can have all sorts of writings and ideas, and we can have commentaries and books and more words and more words and more words and more words, which is fine. But we can also have an artist coming along and saying, I want to express my ideas on the subject through drawings. And we have many, many examples of beautiful illustrated manuscripts over the centuries, including modern day illustrations, which I'll show you, that basically the artist came along and said, well, you know, this is also my document, and I want to convey what I feel about it. And I think some beautiful work over the centuries, and it's also very nice because it's actually, in this case, it could either be oil paint, or later on we'd use acrylic or whatever other materials. In this particular case, it's actually going to be oil on parchment, on cloth, which is skin, okay, which is animal skin. Here's another example. In this case, we have a beautiful Megillat Esther, scroll of Esther. And we actually have, right, this is further on, and this is telling, again, panels. It almost kind of looked like, how many of you think it almost looks like a comic book? Right. You know, like he's got square panels going on for each scene, telling us kind of like, this is how I want to understand the story of Esther, and perhaps even in my time period. I'm looking at, for example, the clothing, right? The clothing that some of the characters are wearing in the illustrations, and I don't know if that's exactly what people were wearing back in the time of Esther, but perhaps it was in the time of the artist. And I think that's really nice. One of the reasons I like this so much is that, besides the fact that it's telling a story, is it's telling the artist's perspective. I like that, because we can have sacred writings that span hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's so important that in every generation and in every household and every community and every individual can somehow feel, hey, I own this. This is my story. And the artist, thankfully, has conveyed his or her story here. So we've just finished Pesach, and we would use a Haggadah, right? The book that helps us through the order of the Passover Seder. And so Haggadahs have been around for a long, long time. This particular one that you're looking at is from the year 1320. And the origin of it is not, we're not 100% sure if it's from Spain or northern France, but it is quite remarkable, quite beautiful, and it's survived all these years. Even I think the vibrancy of the color is still so powerful. And again, it's just again a wonderful way that the artist is telling his or her story through the traditional Passover Seder. We've talked about this before, and for those of you who are with me on the do-it-yourself DIY Seder, one of the things I talked about was, how do you make this your own? How do you make sure that when you tell the story to others, or to yourself if you happen to be in quarantine, how do you tell the story in a way that is going to be personally meaningful? And I think what the artist has done here, right, is created a Haggadah for him or herself that others could obviously enjoy, that makes this timeless story personally relevant. And I think that's what really remarkable. So since we're talking about Haggadahs, I want to introduce a friend and colleague. This is David Moss. And David Moss is an outstanding artist and storyteller, and he lives in Jerusalem, and he has a gallery in Jerusalem. And some of you may be familiar with his work. In this particular case, he is talking about and presenting his Haggadah, right? We're talking about the Haggadahs. His Haggadah, which is known as, yes, you guessed it, the David Moss Haggadah. Listen, if you're this famous, you might as well name your Haggadah David Moss Haggadah. So he's naming it, it's the David Moss Haggadah. He's going through page by page. Just to give you an idea, this particular Haggadah, I believe this particular one that he's showing went on sale for $12,000. Copies can also be obtained, but his original works are quite pricey, and for good reason. He does beautiful work. And again, I think it's really special if you have a chance to Google David Moss, or even better, when coronavirus finally leaves us, come on over to Jerusalem and go to the Artist Quarter, which is right near Jaffa Gate in the Old City, and you'll find a very special center there called Kol Ha'ot, which is a art and education center that anybody can go to and visit. And David Moss's studio is right beside it, and David Moss is also one of the educators at Kol Ha'ot. Anyways, going back to it, this is his Haggadah, and I just think it's so cool that he's done a beautiful job illustrating it and continues to tell the story. Stenders. So what's a Stender? So Stender is a Yiddish word, and it means a stand, like the Stend, like it's a stand in which you would read from. And this is, right, because a lot of what's going on in Jewish prayer involves standing, right? You have to stand up, certain things you got to stand for, right? Specifically the Shemona Esrei, which is the Amidah, which is the silent prayer. We say it 3 times a day, 4 times on Shabbat. And again, functionally, you could just get up and stand. That's it. You could just do that. Or if you want to have something to put your book on, you could have a stand to put your book on. But leave it to our Jewish artists to come along and say, well, again, if we're going to do something that's functional, that's useful, then why not make it really beautiful? Why not really invest, right, in our Jewish rites, when I say rites, R-I-T-E-S, in our practices? Why don't we have a chance to make this so beautiful? I love this Stender. It's from Yemen, and it's from the 17th century. Handmade, obviously, and you could just see the handiwork, the love and the dedication that must have been put into this by the Yemenite, right? By the Yemenite artist that obviously put so much dedication into this beautiful work of art that would have either been in a synagogue or in a house of study, in a yeshiva, or perhaps even in a private home. And since we're talking about Stenders, and since I've already introduced you to my friend David Moss, so let me introduce you to, yes, you guessed it, the David Moss Stender. This is the David Moss Stender, and this is a modern production. He has made several. of these Stenders, and they come in, you can get them in whatever color you like. But here's what's really cool about it. You see all the other pieces at the bottom of the Stender, like for example, that long thing, which is the lulav case, and there's a tzedakah box, and there's a challah board, right? And a zillion, and a Seder plate, and a Havdalah candle, and there's all sorts of pieces, and all these pieces, are you ready for this? Came out of the Stender. This Stender is like, what was that thing where cars turn into Transformers? Remember Transformers, right? Where cars turn into robots or something like this. So lahavdil, but this is a similar idea, and this is a very, very cool. Again, I love this. I definitely am calling this Jewish art because it's so functional. And what he's done is he's taken all these different pieces throughout the Jewish calendar, throughout the Jewish year, right? And he said, let's pack it all into one Stender. It's really, really an amazing thing to see. You can also Google this and take a look at a video of, because they've got actually 2 videos where they actually literally unpack the David Moss Stender. And I just think this is a beautiful modern piece of Jewish art. So another holiday that I really love is Sukkot. Who's with me? I love Sukkot. I love Sukkot because I really love being outside, right? I love being outdoors. I love the fresh air. And this is actually a Jewish holiday which says, go outside, spend as much time as you can outside. And I think that's really, really fantastic. And in Israel, Sukkot is the best because I think the season is just, right, the weather is just perfect. And I know from being back in Toronto that sometimes, I'm from Toronto originally, and you can sometimes get some really beautiful Sukkot weather, but sometimes I remember a few times where it snowed and you're getting in there and getting out as quickly as you can. That's too bad. So Sukkot in Israel is just amazing. But this particular sukkah actually was not from Israel. The sukkah is actually, it's a painted sukkah, and it's from Germany from the 19th century. And it's presently, however, you can actually see it at the Israel Museum. It's actually there at the Israel Museum. And again, it's an example of something functional. But again, the artist comes along and says, well, I'm going to actually make this into something beautiful, and I'm going to create the pictures to be something that I see literally out of my window, out of my German window. And again, having spent time in Germany, I can tell you that when I look at the pictures, I can think of several towns, especially many of the towns that did not get destroyed during World War II, where this type of architecture can still be seen today throughout Germany. So it's kind of interesting that he or she has reflected what he or she sees out their window inside the walls of the sukkah. And again, just kind of making the holiday an even more beautiful holiday. So if you've been to Tzfat and you've been to Livnaut, so you're definitely going to know this picture. This is Abu Hav Synagogue. This is Beit Knesset Abu Hav. It's about a 10-second walk from Livnaut, and it's just a really, really special place. And Tzfat itself, I always often feel as I walk through Tzfat sometimes feels like I've literally fallen into an artist's, an artist's paint box, and I'm trying to swim my way through it. I just feel like everywhere you turn, whether it's the blue painted doors of private homes, or whether it's just some random sculpture just sitting in the middle of the street, whether it's the weaving that's going on, the music, right? No matter what's happening, you always feel that you're literally swimming through an artist's palette, paint palette. This is the Abu Hav Synagogue, and just to be in this place, well, first of all, this is a major tourist attraction, and Tzfat tourists are coming here, and I'm not sure whether they're coming there because it's a synagogue or whether or not they feel they've just walked into a painting. But whatever the case is, it's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful synagogue that has so many things coming at you, whether it's the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Torah, or whether it's the Bima, that raised area where the Torah is going to be written, and with the beautiful blue painted wooden platform, whatever it happens to be. There's just so many things that stimulate the senses. I think that's for me what happens. I just feel like, whoa. I'll say this quite honestly. The first time I ever went to Abu Hav, I think was with Gabi Nachmani back in the mid 90s. He took me there during Slichot, which is when we woke up at some ridiculously early hour in the morning and went there. But we were served really nice tea and everything, so all was well. And I have to tell you that I was actually a little bit distracted. I was a little bit distracted by all the symbols and by all the artwork, and it took a little while till I could actually focus a little bit. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. Maybe that's part of it too, eh? All right, so that's Abu Hav. Again, get to Tzfat, experience this for yourselves. It's absolutely amazing. So what do you do when you actually turn the bride, right? The bride into a piece of art. And this is exactly what's happening in Yemen. Okay, this is a bridal dress from Yemen. And when I did more research about this, I was just amazed to read that the goal was to literally turn the bride into a piece of jewelry, not in an objective kind of way. In other words, God forbid, not turning her into an object, but rather into an even more beautiful, right? Even more beautiful woman. And I thought that was really, really incredible. You basically have this this covering over her head, all the different jewelry going around her neck, okay, the embroidery and the handiwork of the dress itself, right? You can imagine the person inside this, how people would just be in awe. I would think in absolute awe. This is from the early 20th century from Yemen. And I just think it's so amazing that the artists are saying, hey, how do we actually incorporate, right, the bride to be part of the work of art? So I thought that was an interesting perspective. Since we're talking about dresses, this is from Morocco, from the 19th century. Now you're going to ask, okay, Shmuel, I get everything else, but why is this Jewish art? Why did I pick this as Jewish art? It could have been any dress from Morocco or any dress anywhere, right? I don't see anything on here that specifically has Jewish symbolism at all. Maybe we can go into further details. Maybe you could find something. But I wanted to call this Jewish art because it was made by a Jewish dressmaker for a Jewish client. And although that might not be enough to categorize something as Jewish art, I think that is. I think that when a Jewish dressmaker specifically has a Jewish client in mind, and you're coming from Morocco, which is a place of very, very rich, not necessarily wealth financially, but rich in terms of culture, rich in terms of artistry, and food and spices and smells. I can't help think that there was a Jewish flavor, right, that went into this dress. If you have any thoughts and ideas as to why this may or may not be a Jewish dress, please send over your comments.
I see Rimonim there, maybe.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. And Rimonim, definitely. Rimonim is a Jewish symbol. Rimonim is a Jewish. First of all, it's one of the indigenous fruits of the land of Israel, right? One of the what they call the 7 species. It's really very, very special. But it's also at the hem, where the Kohen, the priests in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash would have worn bells, like a bell that would have looked like a rimonim, and specifically, very good, very, very good. I think you're right. It would have been the actually working, functioning bell would have been at the hem of the skirt of the Kohen, who would have been a male. And he would have, as he's walking around, you would have actually heard the ringing sound of the bell inside the rimonim. And here we have that addressed for a woman, of the same pattern that the Kohen would have worn in the Beit HaMikdash. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Can I just interject? Eva has a comment about the actual name of that kind of dress, that kind of clothing, and she actually has pictures. She said she did. I don't know if you can see the chat. Can you see the chat?
No, but I'll see it. I'll see it. I'll see it. I'll see it in a few minutes.
Okay. And then also Igor had a question about using images of humans or animals incorporated into Jewish art.
Excellent question, Igor. So, so we know directly from right from the source itself, from the Ten Commandments, it actually talks about not making graven images. And now that graven images may have been referring to graven image of what we thought God might look like, but also refers to graven images of people. And so we have a very, very ancient tradition of not actually using human images in art. Having said that, we will, however, find in many, many cases Jewish art with human images. Now, in some of those cases, Igor, some of the human images have been partially erased. In other words, I've seen images of people where not all of their face is shown. And in most cases where you have Jewish art with a human face, it only shows the profile. It only shows half, possibly an idea where, well, graven images, the idea of not showing a Jewish face means the whole face, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, 2 ears. And so if we show just the profile, right, then it's kind of like, it's not really showing really a Jewish face. And so we do have examples throughout throughout history of using either no human form and only using animals or plants, right, or symbols. Human forms where parts of the face are obscured, or as I mentioned, the other example, profile. Okay, those are traditionally the different options. Great question. All right, should we proceed? By the way, I think Rachel's is in the waiting room, Mayor. Great, thanks. Okay, let's move forward. So, when choosing an actual portrait, it's an impossible task. It's an impossible task, but I got to do it. Okay, so I did it. So I have a few examples here of what I wanted to look at when we're looking at actual portraits. This is this may be hard for some of you, depending on what kind of machine, what you're using, but I'll try and describe it. First of all, let's talk about the artist. His name was Nicholas Poisson, and he's a very, very important artist. He's from the early 17th century. This particular painting, called The Destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, was done in 1625. And from my own understanding, and I think my wife Leah for really bringing this artist to my attention, she really introduced this artist to me. He's considered the leader of the classical French Baroque style of art. And that means that he's drawing on, even though he's living in the 1600s, he's drawing on examples from Greek and Roman styles, right? You get that idea. You can almost feel that idea. And clearly this is the destruction of Jerusalem, of the temple in Jerusalem. However, if you look at the architecture, you look at the clothing, you look at the shields, you look at the armor, everything looks very much not like the right time period. Okay, it looks like something very, very different. Also the style, right? The style of everything is going to be what they call Baroque, which is around that period of time. We're going to see that in other types of paintings from other moments in history. It's an amazing, amazing painting. Is it, by the way, if you look really, really closely, smack in the center of the entire painting, you actually see, yes, you guessed it, the menorah, the candelabra of the Beit HaMikdash being carried away. It's smack in the center of the painting. And again, I look at this as very much Jewish art, because the artist is Jewish, that doesn't necessarily mean that all Jewish artists are painting Jewish art, but in this particular case, he's obviously showing a moment of significance in Jewish history, and he's using Jewish symbols. So again, it's debatable. You may argue with me on that. That's totally fine. But I think it's quite amazing to, I would love to see this painting in the original. It looks very, very moving. Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall. We could not have a discussion about Jewish art without talking about Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall is an artist from the 20th century. He actually passed away in the 1980s, I believe 1986 it must have been, because I actually met him in London at the which gallery? I was in several of them. It'll come to me in a moment. Possibly Royal Albert. No, that wasn't it. Was it the National Gallery? It was the National Gallery in London, and there was an exhibition of Marc Chagall works. And for some bizarre reason, there weren't that many people there that particular morning that I was there. And I actually walked into one of the many rooms in which his art was being displayed. And in that particular room, I don't think there was anybody there except me and this short old man. And I was looking at one particular painting really closely that had Hebrew writing on it. And I was looking at it for a long time, and I had a question about it. I turned around and I realized that the old man was actually Marc Chagall. He passed away at the age of 98. So I think I must have met him when he was probably 97 or 96, possibly like this. And I turned to him, immediately recognized him. And I said to him, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yes." And I asked him a question about the Hebrew writing on this particular painting. And I won't go into the details of the question. It's a little bit not for this discussion, but this is what he did. I'll start back. I asked him, da 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 da, is that true? Yeah. And he looked to he put his hand to his lips. He looked to the left. He looked to the right to see if anybody was watching us. And then he went like this. So he acknowledged my theory about a particular painting. The question had to do, I'll tell you what it was. The question had to do if a particular painting was a self-portrait. And it's not because the man in the painting looked like him. It's just in Hebrew, it said Marc Chagall, and in Hebrew, and which most people, I would imagine, in London would not have paid notice to. But anyways, that was my encounter with Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall painted in different mediums. He's painting on silk. He's painting on glass. If you come to Israel and go to the Hadassah Hospital, you can see the stained glass windows from the different tribes, the tribes of Israel. Amazing. You can go to the Knesset and see his work painted on silk. You can see his work painted on canvas. This particular painting is called, is The Village. It's reminds me of it shows me a Jewish village, perhaps a shtetl. We can see different images here, right, of a Jew, almost looks like Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, right? The goat, but take a look really, really closely and we see not everything is Jewish, right? I don't know if you can see very closely, but the main building, one of the buildings in the shtetl scene actually has a cross on it. And he's showing us perhaps that this was part of our reality, that living a Jewish life in Europe also meant dealing with a Christian life. If you look really, really closely at Tevye, who's painted green, you look around his neck, you'll actually see he's actually wearing a cross around his neck. Marc Chagall is here to cause us to think. He's not going to hand us the answer simply. It's not going to be a case of doing this, and shush, like he did for me in London. He's going to make us really think a little bit about what the story is about, but I think he's always telling us a Jewish story, Marc Chagall. Baruch Nachshon is a contemporary artist. He lives in Hebron. This is a man, a Chabad Jew, who came about art in a different way. He wasn't necessarily, I mean, he was an artist, but he asked a very, very deep question. And that question was, how do I express Judaism in art? In other words, he came from that as a starting point. And so everything that he does, all of his work, without exception, has to do with how he expresses Judaism through art. In this particular case, which is very, 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 very seldom does he do something like this, where he actually has a kind of a picture of the Rebbe, right? Actually in the scene in Hebron, and it's actually called the Rebbe in Hebron. But most of his work does not include any lifelike looking personalities, but rather lots of color, lots of splash in terms of splash of color. He's painting beautiful scenes in Israel, Hebron, Jerusalem, Sfat, Tiberia, countrysides. Okay, very, very beautiful work. And it's a favorite not only for Chabad, but also for Jews of all different colors and stripes. Really, really beautiful stuff. And he's giving us his perspective. If you were to take a picture of Hebron, if you were to go to Hebron right now and take a picture, you might not necessarily see this, right? I mean, there's the Ma'arat Machpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, but this may not be the scene that comes out exactly in your camera, but this is what he sees. This is what Baruch Nachshon sees, and this is the story that he wants to tell us about Israel. This is his Israel. Okay, the next two pictures are photographs that I took. You can even see my shadow there, because there's no way I would take these paintings out of the glass, and I wasn't going to take them off the wall. We have two paintings in our house that are original paintings. Are they Jewish? Well, this looks like some country scene, and that looks like some country scene by the same artist. And so there's nothing about these two scenes that are necessarily Jewish at all. They happen to be scenes from the Ukraine. But one day, Leah and I were at our home in Bet Shemesh, and a Russian or Ukrainian Jew who had just made Aliyah, his name was Yosef, was going door to door selling his artwork. And clearly he was painting from his memories, recent memory of leaving the Ukraine. And you could see at the bottom right, his name written in Hebrew, Yosef, in the bottom right. In both paintings we have that. And we bought these paintings, and we had them framed, and they've been hanging on our walls in every house that we've lived in. And for us, every time we look at it, we think of Yosef. We think of the connection between us as Olim, as immigrants from North America, and Yosef, an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, and how we connected. We connected through his art. Is that Jewish art? Is it not Jewish art? You can decide. Tonight is Erev Yom HaZikaron LeShoah u'leGvura. This is the evening of Remembrance Day for the Shoah and revolution, fighting against the Nazis, those who served in partisans, those who served in uprising. This is the night when we, the night and then tomorrow when we remember the Holocaust. And we should remember every single day, but tonight and tomorrow, special events, special prayers, special speeches throughout Israel and the world. This is Felix Nussbaum. It actually is Felix Nussbaum, the artist. Felix Nussbaum created many beautiful artwork from his home in Germany. This is called Self-Portrait with Jewish Identity Card, and he made it in 1943. And he was both the artist and the model. And in this very harsh and stark painting, he's showing us many, many things, right? He's showing us not just the reality of what it is to be a Jew in 1943 Germany, but he's also showing us his perhaps anxiety, his fear. I'm looking also at his facial features, looking at a man perhaps who hasn't eaten properly in a while, looking at a very dark and gloomy landscape. And when I look at this self-portrait, this really, for me anyways, tells a story of an individual in the Holocaust. The Holocaust is such a big and huge story. 6 million is such a huge number. I know we've done many different interesting projects, including buttons and other things, to look at what 6 million actually looks like, and it's huge. For me, I need to hear the individual story. I need to hear from people and what they went through in order to get an understanding of the horror of what happened. And Felix Nussbaum's self-portrait really does that. Just to let you know, and to give honor to Felix Nussbaum, we actually know the day that he died. He died in Auschwitz on August the 9th, 1944. So I was in Prague a number of years. Yeah.
I think we should just take a few more minutes and then start to finish up. Okay?
You got it. This is our last one. When I was in Prague a couple years ago, I had a chance to see a very special exhibit called the children's art. And this is one of the examples from the children's art. It's from the Terezin ghetto. And the amazing story of this is that a teacher by the name of Friedel Dicker Brandeis taught over a 2-year period children art class in the Terezin ghetto. And in that 2-year period, 4,357 pieces of art, paintings, were actually done by the children, which were put into 2 suitcases. Mrs. Friedel Dicker Brandeis and all the children from the ghetto were sent to Auschwitz. Most of them, pretty much all of them, were murdered there. However, the 2 suitcases filled with these paintings was hidden and discovered, and today you can see it at the Jewish Museum of Prague, and again, honoring Yom HaShoah at this point in time. The last picture I want to show is of a modern production here in Israel. This is by Yaacov Agam, and it's at the Dizengoff Square. Is this Jewish? I don't know, but it's Israeli. And it's also controversial because it keeps getting moved and put back and moved and put back and fixed and repaired and And I think that's part of the Jewish story too, about being moved up and uprooted, even here in the land of Israel sometimes. I think it's back in Dizengoff Square. I'm not 100% sure, but one thing is for sure is it's a beautiful kinetic piece of art. Is it Jewish? I don't know. It's Israeli. Thank you. Questions, comments in the few minutes that we have.
Thank you, Shmuel. I'll make it here. So you guys, anybody who wants to ask a question, you can take yourself off mute, and if you can, turn on your videos or whatever. Shmuel, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. My pleasure. It's a lot to get through. I know that it's a lot to get through. It could really be a longer, but hopefully it gave people a little bit of a taste of this amazing subject. Yeah. By the way, regarding Dylan's question regarding using the Megillah halachically, the Illustrated Megillah, thank you for your question. Like every Jewish question, there's not one answer, right? And that is that halachically it's fine for Megillah Esther, not for a Torah or any other writings, but for Megillah it's fine. However, if you took it into a yeshiva, they may start looking at you and asking you questions. So halachically it's fine, but if you want to avoid controversy or bringing up, then you may not want to bring it into your local yeshiva. But as far as your synagogue, or certainly reading it at home, halachically not a problem. Thanks for your question.
Thank you. This may be too big of a question, but through examining this art over thousands of years in terms of it, is there any what are some, I guess, and you spoke about it in the lecture, but what are some general themes or things that you think combines, what makes Jewish art have its Jewishness, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and there's many answers. My own opinion on this is that it combines, it's going to have a number of different elements. Either it's going to be beautiful, making a already a needed Jewish object, which you need, right? Whether it's to cover the Torah or whether it's that Stender we were talking about. I didn't show this, but I saw this beautiful kit for Brit Milah. Brit Milah is circumcision, okay? You would think that there's nothing you could do to make that, right? To decorate that, okay? Like, what are you gonna do? What kind of right? And yet
Yeah.
I actually saw an amazing, beautiful box which contains the knives and the other equipment for the mohel, for the circumciser. So again, if it's going to be something that you're going to need to make it more beautiful, if it's dealing with a period of Jewish history that you want to reflect and you want to convey, like we've seen some of the paintings, either with whether it's with Marc Chagall or Nicolas Poisson, or whether or not it has to do with a Jewish symbol, whether it's a Magen David or the Menorah or the Rimonim, like Meir was talking about, which identified that particular dress from Morocco. So those are some of the things which I'm going to say, for me, define Jewish art. Again, it's completely open to your interpretation.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much.